Welcome to Chris Strub Unmuted. I'm Chris Strub, and today we're talking about the 7 best digital marketing books of all time. This is the best personal brand digital marketing book I've ever read, and it's not close. This is Chris Strub Unmuted, a show designed for open dialogue, honest reflections, and uncensored truths about the lives that we lead. Today's episode talks about let me grab them here. The 7 best digital marketing books of all time. If you are getting started or trying to improve in your own personal digital marketing career, trying to build a personal brand in particular, maybe you're a student, shout out to everyone in college, trying to figure out what to do and how to build your own brand and start a career in digital marketing in 2026 and beyond. These books should go on your shelf immediately. And if you counted that screenshot, if you just screenshotted that image that I showed you there a moment ago on YouTube, you notice there's actually 8 books in the stack. I'm selfishly going to start by pointing out that my book, 15 Seconds of Fame, is not one of the 7 books that we're going to be talking about today, but you should get it anyway. If you listen to Chris Strub Unmuted, please do me a favor. It would be a major support to the show to go on Amazon, get a copy of 15 Seconds of Fame. I've talked about this book on the show before. We're not going to talk about it today. That is my 3rd book. Of course, my first book is 50 States, 100 Days, the book. Hey, you can get this book too. This is kind of my life story. But today we're not talking about my work. We're talking about the work of 7 authors, all of whom I really look up to. Okay, and I've read these books over the last, let's call it decade or so. So my memory on all 7 of these books might not be perfectly sharp. I do have some notes written down from most of these books that we'll kind of run through also. But if you are, like I said, especially like college age, like early to mid 20s, trying to figure out what to do with your career, maybe you're looking up to Chris Strub for some reason and wanting to lead your own kind of unconventional path, maybe work some different jobs in the digital marketing space over the years. This is the episode for you guys. This is an episode for you. And hopefully, if you haven't already, by the end of this episode, I want you to go to Amazon and actually buy these books and go read them yourself. Really, like this is how I have kind of worked my way. I don't want to even say worked my way up, worked my way through my career in digital marketing and building a personal brand. And these 7 books are among the pillars and the ways that I've formulated a lot of my own philosophies and ideas. And also all of these authors are just cool people. I've met almost all of these authors in person too, and we'll talk about that as we go through. Look, any discussion of digital marketing in the 21st century, any discussion of leading your own path in a digital first world starts with this book. This book is called Known by Mark Schaefer. And a couple of the themes that you're going to hear throughout today's episode, a lot of these authors have written multiple books. Mark Schaefer, whom I've met, I've broken bread with, nicest guy in the world, doesn't live terribly far from me. He lives up in Tennessee. And I live here, of course, in South Carolina. So I've been fortunate enough to meet with Mark, speak to him one-on-one. Nicest guy you'll ever meet. Mark personally will tell you that he doesn't think that this is his best book. I will disagree with him and tell you that this is the Mark Schaefer book. And not just the Mark Schaefer book, this is the book that you want to get started with. If you are in college and you're taking a class like Dr. Karen Freeberg's class or any other sort of digital marketing, personal branding type approach, please, this is 100% required reading. This, again, these lists of sevens that I'm doing for season 7 of Chris Strub Unmuted are not necessarily in order, but there is absolutely a reason why Known is the first book that I'm going to tell you about here in season 7, episode 2. And as we go through some of these books, I'm going to put links in the show notes to, I guess they're called X threads now. When I wrote them, they were Twitter threads. I use a hashtag called Strub Reads to take public notes on some of these books that I've read. I actually thought I had them for all of them, but unfortunately Twitter search, X search doesn't work as well as it used to, and I can't find some of these threads. I'd be really surprised if I don't have a thread for all 7 books that we're going to talk about today. I do have a publicly available thread for Known, which I read on a plane back from San Diego to Charlotte on January 23rd, 2019. There's 11 chapters and 2 appendices, and so much of the way that I've built my own personal brand over the years is shaped by what is outlined in this book. You know, I talk about in the notes here, and I encourage you to go back and read my notes too. If you're not sure you want to buy the book, these Twitter threads, these Strub Reads threads, are another great way to kind of examine the very best parts and the highlights of a book, right? Maybe the biggest principle that I stole, lifted, borrowed, took from Known is Mark's philosophy on identifying and appreciating your alphas. And he talks about it on page 152. It's funny, I got the book in my hand so I can open up right to it here, even as I'm looking at the thread. Do you know who shares your content the most? Do you know your alpha audience by name? If you spend any time at all nurturing an emotional connection with your followers, it should be with these special people. Your alphas. That principle alone of understanding who the people are, who the actual people are with whom your content resonates the most, building relationships with your alphas is perhaps the most important lesson you'll hear from all 7 of these books in this episode here today. I have taken that principle and run with it for the last 7+ years, knowing and establishing strong relationships with those folks who want to support you, who believe in you, who see what you're doing and respect it and appreciate it and understand it. And I have been lucky enough to develop my own community of Chris Strub's alphas over the years because I picked up on this principle by reading Known in 2019, right? You're never going to be able to please everybody on the internet. And in the 7 years since I read this book, the culture of the internet has become even more particleized. It was already particleized back before COVID when I read the book. Now, 7 years later, because so many people are pursuing these content creator opportunities and these non-traditional paths and career paths, it's harder and harder to build your own community and grow a community. Community growth starts by identifying your alphas, whether you're doing that for your own personal brand or doing it on behalf of like a big brand, right? That principle carries through in how people are still successfully using social media today in 2026 and beyond. The other big section that really, really jumped out at me the most from this book starts page 212. Let me read a passage to you from this section, subtitled, "When is it time to quit?" Okay. And Mark writes, "If you still love what you're doing, but you see no momentum after at least a year, then perhaps you need an adjustment in one of the 4 elements I've described in this book. Place, maybe your sustainable interest isn't distinctive enough or you haven't articulated it in a way that people can understand. Space, perhaps you've picked the wrong channel to build your brand or you underestimated the information density in your niche. Consistent content, perhaps you're not creating enough content to make a difference or the content is boring. An audience, often people pursue a path and later learn that the audience is so small that their dreams simply are not achievable. If one of these scenarios sounds plausible, adjust, pivot, and keep going. So the broad principle of known is that you should be and can be and will be known for something. What is it that you're known for? Unknowingly to me, because I hadn't read this book before I left on my own journey, I think in a lot of ways I was and still in some ways am known for visiting 50 states in 100 days. Now I'm known for different things, right? I'm known for being the Giving Day guy. I'm known for running 50 states, half marathons in all 50 states, right? I'm known to some degree for being the Orange Theory guy. And so I don't know that I still have a full grasp on what exactly Chris Strub is known for. Hopefully it's the Giving Day guy stuff, because that's where I can actually make money from building a personal brand. But as you're determining who you are and who you want to be in the digital space and what your brand is, either your personal brand or a brand that you're working for, or ideally both, you really want to understand what people know you for. And this book, Known, gives you an incredible framework of how exactly to define that, how and when to pivot. It gives you example after example of people and brands who are known for who they are, what they do, and how they were able to really lean into that and succeed. I love this book. It might be time for me to reread this entire thing, because I should have come into this podcast better prepared to talk to you exactly about what this book is about. But this book is the sort of book that is worthy of its own, maybe not even just single episode of the podcast, but its own series, right? Like I said, if you go to Mark Schaefer's website, you listen to him speak, he's going to talk to you about some of his other books. I've read some of his other books. I think this book is his best work. I think he's humble about it. Also, this book was written a while ago, and of course he wants to sell more copies of newer books. Love you, Mark. This is not just Mark's best work, this is the best personal brand digital marketing book I've ever read, and it's not close. This book is in a tier of its own. This is above S tier in terms of what you should read immediately. I cannot endorse this highly enough. I want you to read this book, and then I want you to report back to me and let me know how it helped you reflect on your own personal branding journey. Mark Schaefer, Known, the handbook for building and unleashing your personal brand in the digital age. This is a timeless read, guys. This is a book that will stand the test of time forever and ever and ever. It is platform agnostic. It is beautifully done. It's not too long. It's not too short. This is the book that made me one of Mark Schaefer's alphas for life. Mark, shout out to you, man. Hope you're doing well. I'll text you after this to let you know, and I'll text you when the episode comes out. But this might be the best book I've ever read. It's that good. This episode, again, I'd say Known is the top book. The rest of these books, you can really put them in any order, and you can't go wrong at all. My good buddy, Marcus Sheridan, wrote his magnum opus, and Marcus is another example of a guy who has written multiple books. This is the best one. This is the book that you'd say Marcus Sheridan is known for. It's They Ask, You Answer. And anytime I even tell my friends about Marcus, that sentence doesn't end until I say he's the author of They Ask, You Answer. This book flips on its head the idea of how you should market your product, your business in a digital world, right? This book really sharply examines, and through the lens of Marcus's own steep ascension as a digital marketer, it's easy to believe in what Marcus is talking about because he can back it up with prime examples of both a lot of the people that he interviews and coached through his own system, but even more relevantly, the principle that he applied to his own business that allowed him to skyrocket from a fledgling pool salesman to arguably the most successful pool salesman in the world. Okay. Marcus is a really cool guy. I'm lucky enough to call him a friend. He's in a fantasy football league with me that he's not a great fantasy football player. Let's just be honest. Like, he's a very good author and generally a nice guy. He's a dad. Okay, we get it. Yeah, all right. Not a great fantasy football player, so maybe he needs to read a couple books about fantasy football to kind of work his way up through that. Find the equivalent of They Ask You Answer in a fantasy football perspective, and maybe that'll be helpful to Marcus's championship chances in future years. But this, especially, make sure you get the revised and updated edition. As with anything in the digital marketing space, there's always going to be timely updates and ideas. And this is the latest edition here. But I do also have a Strub Reads thread of They Ask You Answer. I read this during the COVID era, so back in June of 2020. And again, if you read through this thread, again, Marcus introduces this book as I tweeted here. The genesis of Marcus's success story comes from a precipitous collapse in 2008, right? Confronting real deep challenges in his business that led to real deep challenges in his personal life too. And adapting the system of They Ask You Answer, which, spoiler alert, encourages you to think about the questions that your customers are constantly asking about you and making that the centerpiece of your content framework around your brand and your business. Right? So instead of building a system where you're trying to hide certain information, the single biggest thing that Marcus talks about throughout the book, it's not a book about pricing, but pricing is probably the biggest principle described in here. It's about using your voice proactively to get ahead of the questions that customers are going to ask you. And over again, Marcus gives examples in the book of how how potential customers, clients, were able to research on their own all of the questions that they would ordinarily have gone into a high-level sales conversation asking. They go into those conversations, one, already knowing the answers to the questions that they were planning to ask, and two, already having a familiarity with the person that they're about to speak to on the phone or on a Zoom call, right? So as a salesperson, you're getting multiple steps ahead of your competition by placing yourself in the mind of your customer and proactively answering their questions with this creative and comprehensive content. So look, I could talk about this book all day as well. This book will light up your brain. It will encourage you to flip your own content strategy on its head. And Marcus walks the walk. He doesn't just talk the talk in the book. He walks the walk through the success stories that he tells humbly about his own success in the book. It's not braggadocious. But more so through the examples of the people that he meets and works with in the years preceding the book. And it's just success story after success story after success story, to where you can't argue with the level of success that's described in They Ask You Answer. This book will change the way you market your business. And as an extension, so if you read Known first and then you get into They Ask You Answer, this can also be a really useful piece of a building block for you to start building a more successful personal brand as well, right? I love some of the quotes in here. He's such a well-spoken dude and an A+ trash talker. to when it comes to fantasy football. Much better trash talker than actual fantasy football manager. But he says the moment a business thinks it wants to work with everyone is the moment that a business starts to become very, very unhappy. When you don't try and sound smart and instead try and have open communication with your listener, that's when the magic happens. He emphasizes empathy along the journey, talks about how content never sleeps, and I'm blown away by this book, man. Again, these 7 books are not in any specific order, but I think Known is a clear number 1, and They Ask You Answer is a clear A1 or 1A, right? These are 2 incredible books that will change the way you think about everything that you're doing with using content marketing to power and grow your business. They Ask You Answer. Love you, buddy. 3rd on my list. Go buy this book. Please, young listeners, watchers of the podcast, Real Artists Don't Starve. Actually, young, old, medium age like Chris Strub. Read this book by Jeff Goins, a 3rd example of an author that if you speak to him, and I was blessed not just to meet Jeff, but to actually share a stage in Rockford, Illinois. Shout out to Lauren. Thank you for having us, and especially having me, because Jeff is on stages all the time. I'm just some crazy podcaster here in South Carolina. Real Artists Don't Starve. This book will change the way that you think about getting paid for the work that you do. This is a 3rd book that I feel as I'm holding it in my hand, I'm like, oh my God, I need to go back and reread this book. I am heartbroken that I cannot find a Strub Reads thread that I did about Real Artists Don't Starve. But the principles behind this book are exactly what I just described. That as a creative, for generations, dating all the way back, for hundreds and hundreds of years, there's been this false stigma publicly, societally, that artists are, sitting on the side of the road with their guitar case open, begging for nickels and quarters as they're playing a song on the street. Jeff Goins, who is just incredibly well-spoken and a tremendous author, crumples up that philosophy and throws it back in your face and reminds you that it's not just important, but critical for you as an artist to get paid to do the work that you do. The principles that Jeff talks about in this book have been so vital and important for me over the last few years as a solopreneur, as a creator, as someone who has built his own untraditional career path, to remember that real artists don't starve. There is no pride, there is no joy in starving, just to pursue the work that you think that you love to do. This book does not discourage you from being an artist, and the definition of artist is very broad based here. When we talk about this as from a digital marketing perspective, you could drop this book in a time capsule and drop it back in 1900, well before the internet or even TV or anything, and it would still make sense because the principle is the same. So I love being able to talk about these books in 2026. Let me hold up all 3 of these books that I've talked about so far, because these are really the 3, man. Known, Real Artists Don't Starve, and They Ask You Answer. All 3 of these books may be a few years old by now, but all 3 of these books, the lessons that are taught in here are timeless. They are not platform dependent. So if you're like, oh, well, TikTok wasn't around when Jeff Goins wrote this book, it doesn't matter. This book is as good as it gets. The principles in here are just crucial for young people that are looking to build their own brand and do your own thing. Like Chris Strub, I wish I had read this book 10, 15 years earlier, because this book is the kick in the butt that you need to remind yourself that the work that you do is valuable, it's meaningful, and importantly, it brings value to others who can pay you and who should pay you for the work that you are doing for them to benefit them. Real Artists Don't Starve. It's as good as it gets. It's another book that's, look, it's not that long. And it is well worth your read. So if you are a college student in the digital marketing space and you're dreaming about especially trying to build your own personal brand, either with or without a full-time job to support you, boom. Real Artists Don't Starve, known, and then supplement that with a side of They Ask You Answer. You're going to be 1,000 miles ahead of your colleagues if you sit down, spend a few days, and read these 3 books. 4th book on my must-read list. This is The Experience Maker by probably my best friend, Dan Gingiss. Love you, Dan. This is the hardcover. This is actually the limited edition, the collectible light-up cover. I'll have my video editor, Jeff, like light up this little light bulb there. Maybe Max and Jeff will charge me extra for that. Boom. I'm just kidding, boys. But this is the special limited edition collectible light-up cover of The Experience Maker. Dan Gingiss is one of the best keynote speakers in the world. And his through line, his principle as a speaker is that businesses cannot win by competing on price. You win by creating the best customer experience possible. You'll have to go listen to a Dan Gingiss podcast, or better yet, go see him in person at a keynote if you get the opportunity to get the full, deep explanation of what exactly he means by that. But The Experience Maker gives you a great overview of the framework that he often describes in his signature keynote. And Dan has multiple keynotes that he can offer, but most frequently he's talking through the Wiser framework, where he is encouraging brands and businesses to take a deep mental dive into all aspects of the customer experience. You know, how a customer, from the moment they, encounter your brand for the first time, all the way through the purchasing journey, whether it's in person or digital, what are all of those little shareable, memorable moments that are happening where this company, this brand is differentiating itself from its competition. It's not a competition of dollars and cents. It's not, hey, even if we've got the same product or a similar product, we're going to charge less and win that way. Dan's philosophy on the through the Experience Maker is, and spoiler alert, his keynote ends with an encouragement that if you read the book, if you listen to his keynote, if you understand these principles, you yourself can be the experience maker. We are all making experiences in one way or another for the people that are consuming our content or buying stuff from our brand or our business. That's where Dan and his expertise comes in. Dan is a brilliant dude. He's got lots of big brand experience with, I worked with him at Humana. He also worked at Discover Card and McDonald's. And now, like I said, he is one of the world's foremost keynote speakers. He's probably on stage right now. I would text him, but he's traveling all around the country, all around the world, giving speeches. Dan is also featured in season 6 of Chris Strub Unmuted. If you want to go back and listen to me interviewing Dan and talking about his experience as a dad. He's just a great human being. So big shout out to Dan. Really fun, clever forward in this book by the great Anne Hanley also. So you can buy the book just for Anne's introduction too. We're big Anne Hanley fans here, but The Experience Maker is filled with tons and tons of real life examples of brands that are winning by differentiating themselves through the experiences that they are proactively and strategically creating for their customers. I love this book. I love the author of this book. Dan Gingiss, you're the man. This book should be among anyone's top 7 for how to win in a digital marketing era in 2026 and beyond. Real quick, one more note on the Experience Maker. I do have a Strub Reads X/Twitter thread up on this. I read this book immediately after it came out. I had to be one of the first folks to read all the way through it back in early September of 2021. Again, when we talk about the timelessness of the content in these books, this is another book where the principles are really timeless. So don't worry about, this book was written 5 years ago. Yeah, it's still great, and it'll be great 5 years from now, 50 years from now. It's the principles in the book that matter, not the practical applications through a specific social media platform or something like that. Like the stories and the anecdotes that are told and the principles of the framework are going to be applicable 2021, 2026, 2086. You can read this book at any point and you will benefit from it. It's The Experience Maker by Dan Genghis. All right. Boy, where do you even start with Gary Vaynerchuk? This is my favorite Gary V book. I have not read every Gary V book. I've read a handful of them, and I can easily say that Thank You Economy is my personal favorite. I'd love to hear in the comments if you have another Gary V book that you really love, or maybe you're more of a podcast consumer. But I think a lot of us in the digital marketing space share a love of Gary V. And for me, this is the book that stands out the most among Gary's many fine works, right? So I read this book for the first time in February of 2019. This is probably, I'd say this is definitely the oldest book of the 7 that we're going to talk about today. So when I'm talking about the principles in here and not necessarily the platform specific examples, Thank You Economy is going to be forever applicable to just the way that you approach life and the way that you sort of, not again, the way, what I just said, the way that you approach life. Like this book will not just change the way that you approach digital marketing and not just the way that you build your personal brand. This book will change the way that you approach interacting with other humans in your day-to-day life. That to me is what Thank You Economy is about, is building a life built on gratitude. And I hope one day when I leave this earth, and Gary has talked about this a lot over the years, like the value of a human is really hard to define, but Gary always talks about how many people will show up for his funeral, which is really a grim way to think about it. But that's stuck with me too. You know, are you leaving an impression? Are you leaving a positive impression on people? And Thank You Economy does an amazing job of reminding us that the best way that we can utilize these platforms and utilize our voice on social media is to express gratitude. Here's a quote from Gary Vee. The number of people with whom you have connections is far less important than the quality of those connections. It's just a fact that most of the world looks at those numbers and judges you for them. And it's true. It goes back to what Mark Schaefer talks about, you know, when you're talking about defining your alphas too, right? Like my podcast, Chris Strub Unmuted, is never, ever going to be the number one podcast on the planet. It's never, ever going to come close to the zeros and exponential forms of addition that you need to quantify how many people know about and admire and look up to and have bought from Gary Vaynerchuk. But God damn it, if I haven't tried my best since reading Thank You Economy to be a man who is known for being grateful and who is known for demonstrating appreciation and respect and continuing that cycle of gratitude through my voice at every single juncture. All of the live streams that I've done over the last decade plus now, like I hope that someday when I'm gone, whether you physically come to my funeral or you leave a comment somewhere, I hope that I'm known for being someone who follows all of the principles that Gary Vaynerchuk talks about in the Thank You Economy. We are nothing without the support of one another. All of these digital interactions go both ways. Podcast is nothing without the folks who are listening and watching and commenting and sharing and downloading and subscribing. And maybe even if you want to buy one of my books or buy a digital course or hire me to come speak or whatever, like whatever those interactions and activities are, it all starts with gratitude, right? So if you haven't read Thank You Economy, please go get this book today. Check it out. Read it. Again, another book that is nothing crazy to read through. You can read it in a day. Go sit out in the hammock, grab yourself a nice glass of iced tea, or better yet, grab yourself a Mango Fuego C4 on ice. And take notes. Mark them down in the book. Steal my idea. Put your last name on a hashtag and make it blank reads. And just remember that we live ultimately in a society powered by respect and appreciation and relationships, right? And no one demonstrates that better than Gary Vee. Taking the unscalable and scaling it. And I'm forever grateful to Gary Vee for publishing this book, and even more importantly, for leading a life since he's published this book that still follows these principles, right? So when Gary Vee buys the Jets someday, I might even become a Jets fan, man. That's how grateful I am to Gary Vee for all that he has done for supporting the mental health of creators who might think that the best path forward for them is to selfishly self-promote and gratuitously accept praise without giving it back. Gary Vee flips all of that on its head, and it's really spawned an entire generation of digital marketers powered by gratitude. This book changed a lot of lives, Gary, and it changed mine, man. So I'm grateful to you for writing this, and hopefully if you're watching or listening to this podcast or to this TikTok or wherever you might encounter a clip of this, Gary, thank you for writing the Thank You Economy. This is a book that has changed a lot of lives, including mine. That's 5 male authors. Look, I love my dudes, all of y'all, Jeff, Dan, Mark, Gary, Marcus. I looked through all my list of favorite books, and this book by Chelsea Pites, it's called Talking in Pictures. This is a fantastic example of another principle-based book. Now, this book is going to be a little bit more Snapchat focused, or as we would call it in 2026, I guess Snap focused. But I think more so than she realized when she wrote this book, the principles that Chelsea talks about with camera first communication will forever be applicable in the digital marketing space. It certainly changed and reshaped the way that I communicate with people, both personally and professionally, using video to communicate with potential customers, using video, for example, in email, or using using video to espouse the principles like we talked about with They Ask You Answer. Chelsea's book, let's just read from the back jacket here. Snapchat was the app that launched the camera-first revolution. It was authentic, personal, and unlike any other social platform in existence. Written by a Gen Xer, not a millennial who built an engaged community without hacks or shortcuts. This is another book from another era of social and digital marketing and connection. My buddy Joel Kahn talks about how we're still, probably now in 2026, I know a lot of the Periscope, Blab, live streamy kind of formative years, 2017, 18, 19. It was a really fascinating era of digital marketers connecting with one another in ways that we had never imagined or experienced before. Chelsea Pites and her book put herself right at the forefront of that. Anyone who's read Talking in Pictures knows that this is a book that will transform the way that you communicate, especially when you're building a personal brand. And Chelsea did an incredible job of walking her own walk by following the principles that she talks about in Talking in Pictures. Right? So it's part self-reflective, it's part forward-thinking, and it's part examination of how Snapchat itself disrupted an industry. But I think even now, almost 10 years later after this book has come out, Talking in Pictures deserves to be on your must-buy list and must-read list, because it really does change the way that you think about using your persona and communicating with people as a person, which is another principle that I've really tried to run with since I read Talking in Pictures for the first time back when it first came out. So, Chelsea, this is an amazing book. It's so beautifully well done, and it's great. It's really great. So I encourage you, as you're thinking about how you can better connect with people like we've talked about through these other books, how can you best establish your alphas? How can you best express gratitude? Talking in Pictures is going to give you a lot of really great practical examples of how you can do those things. Finally, this is a twofer, okay? This is a book by my buddy Jeremy Darlow. This is, I believe, his most recent book. It's called The Darlow Rules. This is his manifesto. This is the thickest book that you're going to see, but I will tell you it's actually still probably one of the quicker reads from the 7 books that we've talked about. This book is almost written like you're reading it on your phone. It's written in big, bold text. It's written with a lot of big visual features. The same way the back and front jackets are kind of disruptively written like this in all caps. Darlow Rules sort of follows that all the way through. It's written like a workbook also, so it's almost like a great little textbook that you can dive in and complete all of the assignments as you're reading through. And the reason I'm talking about Darlow Rules and sort of splitting the difference here is that this is the second Darlow book that I read. The first Darlow book that I read, I cannot find on my bookshelf, and I can't remember if it's because I might have read it digitally instead of in a hard copy, in which case I need to go buy a hard copy myself. But that first book is called Brands Win Championships. And that's really the book that I want to talk about here as number 7, right? Because this Darlow Rules book, I enjoyed it, but kind of like I was talking about with Mark and Marcus, I think the original is maybe better and more valuable than the sequel. Brands Win Championships has long stuck with me in terms of the impact it had on the, thinking about how your brand competes with others in its own space, and thinking about how there's limited amount of attention that goes around, and there's really outsized amounts of attention available for those brands that are leaders in their space. Now, there's infinite numbers of spaces out there, and I think in 2026, as we reflect on the principles behind Brands Win Championships, man, I'd love to talk to Darlow himself about this. Wonder how he might think about and talk about these things differently in 2026 than when this book was written back before 2020. But the idea behind Brands Win Championships, he talks a lot about college sports, college athletics, and how the biggest programs win because of the way they've leaned into building their brands. Brands like Alabama, Roll Tide, right? Brands like Oregon and the Ducks. These brands invest in things that position themselves as winners in their own space. And that winning culture breeds those thought processes that allow that winning culture to sustain. So when you talk about Brands Win Championships, Darlow himself is a college sports marketing expert whose principles can really apply across any brand and any business. Brands Win Championships would be the book that I would put on this top 7, but if you enjoy Brands Win Championships, follow it up with Darlow Rules too. It's some of the same ideas, translated in a totally different reading format that will really change the way that you think about branding and personal branding moving forward. So, show you the whole stack here, just to recap. Okay, go out and buy all of these books. I will have in the description of both the podcast here on YouTube and wherever you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, if you're a reader and if you trust what Chris Strub is telling you about, there's a look at all 7 books, right? Brands Win Championships by Jeremy Darlow, Talking in Pictures by Chelsea Pites, Thank You Economy by the legend Gary Vaynerchuk, The Experience Maker by my buddy Dan Gingiss, Real Artists Don't Starve by Jeff Goins, They Ask You Answer by Marcus Sheridan, and of course, at the top of your list should be Known by Mark Schaefer, the 7 best digital marketing / personal branding books of all time from your boy, Chris Strub. Thanks for listening and watching Chris Strub Unmuted. Support the show by clicking like and subscribe. Keep up with me on social media at Chris Strub. Please click that link in the description of this video and go ahead and use my affiliate link to buy all of these books. We'll put them all on a list, throw them all in your cart, bring them all home, read them in the order that I just described to you. And please reach out, leave a comment on this video, reach out to me on social media at Chris Strub. Let me know what you think. And please leave a comment. Let me know what your favorite digital marketing books are. What did I miss? Are there other books by these authors that you think are better? Are there other books out there by other authors that I haven't heard of? We really would love to build a community around this discussion. And remember, with a big sip of C4, because this was another long episode, Max and Jeff, we are all famous to a few people. Mango Fuego, cheers, baby.